When Megatron created the Decepticon claws in many of the Transformers continuities and universes, it often attracted those discontent with the Cybertronian government, whether just or unjust. However, many use the Decepticon claws as a way to carry out their more nefarious deeds, either in the name of the Decepticon claws or for their own personal enjoyment and gain. Characters on this list are varied from series and continuity, but only in one version of a character will be allowed on this list, to avoid there being 10 Megatrons or 10 Overlords on this list. Though there will be one exception for how extremely different these characters are in both name and personality, that they feel like extremely separate characters. There'll be spoilers for Transformers IDW's 2005 continuity, Transformers Animated, the Align continuity, and many other small parts of Transformers lore. Characters such as Unicron, The Fallen, Sunder, Nova Prime, or Nemesis Prime will not be considered for this list as they are not Decepticons per se, but either unaligned antagonists or fallen Autobots. This list will be in a particular order compared to my previous top 10s. But anyway, let's get on with the list. Starting this list in a more basic way, Shock Blast from the Energon cartoon series is a character of pure insanity, firing upon his own fellow Decepticons and bringing destruction to anything in his way. Having a massive arm-mounted cannon able to tear through any threats that stand in his way of unfiltered violence and destruction proved not only to be a thorn in the side of the Autobots, but Megatron himself in his various attempts at gaining power and killing those who got into his sociopathic goals, which ultimately led to his destruction when his attempt to control Unicron proved to be far more than what he could handle, killing him in the end, crushed under the immense power he was wishing to use upon the Autobots. Shock Blast is an extremely low character on this list for being so evil it's comedic, being a short-lived antagonist, as well as not being as developed in terms of a character later on this list compared to the others, which would come to be a very common part of the Energon series to the point his character was repeated so heavily in his brother, a recolored version of himself, Six Shot. His more two-dimensional character leaves him at number 10, but the next entry is where things start to pick up. Transformers Animated in Season 3 started to go towards a more darker turn, with characters seemingly being more killed in tragic ways, such as Blur inside the Cybertronian trash compactor, but there is a bot who weaponized a dangerous weapon to his advantage, a chemical weapon at that. I briefly mentioned in my last video Cosmic Rust, a weapon that was used by the deadly Oil Slick. Oil Slick is a Decepticon who weaponized Cosmic Rust to a degree of using it as a throwable vial that can fatally injure a Transformer. Combined with his other chemical weapons and more brutal fighting styles, lead me to believe that he would be found on a list of Cybertronian war criminals for his use of chemical weapons and brutalized suffering on any of his enemies that he may encounter. With implications of more brutal Decepticons found in IDW comics, I am extremely surprised he is not seen in any of those comics, even in the 2019 reboot, with characters like Bludgeon or the Decepticon holdout factions who would generously use someone like this among their ranks. But overall, this is my number 9 pick on this list. Next on this list is a Transformer I wish got more spotlight in the later years of Transformers. Being a comic original character back in the early days of the 1980s Marvel Comics, Straxus, or Darkmount as he's also called, is a Decepticon tyrant and prison warden on Cybertron. What makes this Decepticon so deadly in his hunting of any Transformer who is not a Decepticon, any neutral or Autobots still left on Cybertron during the events when Optimus Prime Megatron took to the stars, would be his melting of any Transformer who stood against him. And that meant those neutral and Autobot soldiers would be melted alive. This was used in order to fuel the Decepticon war effort and dispose cleanly of any Transformers that stood against him. To add to this, he did not even care for his soldiers under his command. He often used them as an example or to test his theories, even if they led to the soldiers' demise. Characters like Straxus are hard to implement, but can be done so especially in a setting where Optimus and Megatron abandon Cybertron. I really do wish more series would feature this warlord, even as a Decepticon subfaction leader or a prison warden, but what do you guys think? Comment down below what you guys want Straxus to be used as in other continuities. Transformers from the Japanese G1 continuity often get overshadowed, but in recent years have been given more recognition in the West, with many turning to become terrifying villains in the process. Deathsaurus from the Japanese G1 continuity, but mainly the IDW continuity, is a brutal warlord, and even in IDW, a Decepticon remnant faction leader. Deathsaurus often carries out terror and reign across the galaxy with his steadfast legions of Decepticons, often brutalizing in his campaigns with any method necessary to gain his vision of conquest and destruction. His campaigns in the Japanese G1 continuity would result in a plan to destroy the Earth due to it seeming as a mark of shame for the constant Decepticon defeat seen in the past series. Deathsaurus is an honorable warrior in general towards his men, unlike many entries on this list, but his goals in ransacking worlds, cyberforming, or the process of creating worlds like Cybertron for Transformers to reside forcefully using mechanisms to do so, and many other atrocities. Deathsaurus is a multifaceted character who deserves a video on his own like Straxus, but for the sake of this list, will be short. One of the most bizarre parts of Transformers lore would be be the Pretenders, Transformers with biomechanical shells. While many of the Pretenders characters have been forgotten, characters like Thunderwing and Bludgeon are used as dangerous, maniacal villains in the minds of many of the comic readers. Thunderwing, as seen in the G1 and IDW comics, is a dangerous force to deal with. With their sadistic desires and sheer insanity, these two are grouped together for this reason. Bludgeon is in almost every continuity as a dark, maniacal magic harbinger of chaos and bloodshed, with his campaigns involving destruction, terrorism, and dark warfare, including the use of Transformers voodoo, genocide of Autobots on many worlds, or those who abstain from his traditionalist views of Cybertron, and many more to count. Thunderwing is tied to him in many times, being a highly unhinged, fanatical force to be reckoned with as a leader. So much so that his extreme power and violence often made regular Decepticons work with Autobots out of fear and pure evil that these bots both faced, often resulting in the divine intervention for his death. In summary, these bots are tied often together for their chaos, bloodshedding extremism to diabolical intent to the point of scaring off many of those of their own forces. Overall, Bludgeon and Thunderwing are popular to an extent but lack the main media appearances like shows and video games they so rightfully deserve as wicked villains. Here's hoping to see them in Legacy or any future lines soon enough. Being at the center of this list, I thought it would be fair to put Starscream due to his many iterations and treacherous acts. While many on this list are evil out of pure sadistic violence or brutalized rule, Starscream is in the middle for his high amounts of deception, backstabbing, and traitorous methods in order to gain power and what he desires. Being a heavy opportunist in the comics and media like the Transformers Align continuity, where he would often backstab and lie to power, fighting dirtily as seen in Fall of Cybertron by placing high-powered detonators and explosives on Decepticon soldiers for living explosives. In the IDW comics, he would often feel no remorse, mainly in Megatron Origin, to carry out terrorist attacks against Cybertron civilians, court members, or anyone who stood in the way of the Decepticon cause, not for reform, but for his own gain. Towards the middle part of the IDW comics, he would often kill opponents to his reign on Cybertron or anyone discovering his dark skeletons in his closet. Even in the Generation 1 continuities, he would often haunt many as a ghost as seen in the Beast Wars in the G1 cartoon, or be cosmically powered into killing anything in his path in the Marvel comics, Decepticon and Autobot alike. With a character as complex as Starscream, one can go on for days about how dangerous and powerful this manipulative air commander can be. This may be a topic for a future video, like many of these characters on this list, so please stay tuned for more. Going back to Japanese G1 characters, IDW Comics did an amazing job creating a feared and almost animalistic monster in Overlord in their treatment of Transformers. Overlord was a character not many knew of in the West till the Last Stand of the Wreckers comic came out, an extremely popular and well-written Transformers comic series, which would paint him as a cruel, purely unhinged controller of a Decepticon-controlled Autobot prison. He would often enjoy both Decepticon and Autobot prisoners, being fighting to the death in gladiatorial-style combat for his own amusement. He wouldn't care about ripping Transformers apart, tearing them in half, or torturing them to get his enjoyment. He would enjoy shedding pure violence and would make many consider him worse than IDW Megatron with his leadership and carrying out of atrocities. Later on, he would haunt the comics as a feared enemy, which took the lives of many characters and having a very few set of weaknesses. I won't spoil, but in the end of the comics, a well-deserved death was given to Overlord for what he committed against Cybertronians, deserving his spot on this list. IDW Transformers created many original characters, but none were as devoted or feared than Tarn. Tarn was Megatron's ultimate revenge against Optimus, a close friend to Optimus who had turned and reformed into a vigilant hunter and enforcer for Megatron. Tarn led a group known as the Decepticon Justice Division, a rigid group of enforcers sent to kill, torture, and carry out the will of Megatron. This would lead to him, once Megatron abandoned the Decepticon cause and surrendered, to become a loyal, devoted servant to the Decepticon ideology, then to a leader, carrying out deeds with his team that were unheard of in the Transformers universe before, like lobotomization, ripping core functions out of Transformers for the sake of enjoyment, and many more disturbing things I will not cover on this video. I mean, with a team with many transforming into torture devices like a grinding machine, a smelter, and even an electric chair, there is no denying this will take a long time for some DGD members to appear in other media for their non-kid-friendly and violent ways. Though with Tarn and Legacy, I do hope for the day we'll get the rest of the Justice Division, either as a HasLab or individual releases. You all have been waiting for this, but a Megatron was needed for this list. It's hard to decide which one was most evil, with many being a cartoonishly evil, even comedic in a sense. But the one I decided upon is the Align continuity Megatron. Starting in the War for Cybertron games, he did not care about killing Cybertron, Autobots, or even the lives of his own soldiers. He would carry out grand-scale methods to ensure his role, including but not limited to shooting down fleeing Autobot transports to send a message to Optimus Prime, raiding Autobot City for the sake of slaughter and fueling the war machine, taking a defeated Trypticon and forcefully transforming him into a warship against his will, and much, much more in this continuity. This Megatron is brutal. He will often destroy Optimus mentally with executions, feared-style killings to scare Autobots, as well as extreme torture to prisoners of war. This would bleed into Transformers Prime and his desire for conquest, often being a more competent leader, often demoting and shifting his ranks compared to other Megatrons for the betterment of war performance. This most brutal aspect of Megatron is his unfanatic loyalty in his soldiers to a degree of dying so Megatron could move forward, creating a feared regime and a threat not just to the Autobots but anyone who goes against this fearsome ruler. Before we get to number 1, I have some very honorable mentions. Scorponok is evil, but so bizarre and weird in his goals, especially in IDW. I decided not to talk about him in this and his very weird plan with creating the next generation of Cybertronians and babies. I don't think that would be great on YouTube. IDW Megatron would be on this list, but if you read further into the IDW, you'd see his repentance and reasons for uprising, which makes him more of a tragic and misguided character than evil in my opinion. Galvatron would be on this list, but with him being a more insane version of Megatron, I thought it'd be a disservice to many bots on this list who deserve the spot more. And finally, Giaxis did not get a spot on this list because he is a large enigma I'd like to cover in a video on his own where he stands morally. But the most evil Decepticon in my opinion is Shockwave. A character in so many media has done horrific things no matter what continuity you look at, but I'll do my best to summarize the most tragic and more graphic things he's done. In the G1 comics, he would often undermine Megatron for pure rule of the Decepticons. His various plans to more effectively and emotionlessly lead him to be a ruthless killer, not fazed by those he kills, no enjoyment or sadness in it unlike many on this list. He would later in the Dreamwave comics lead his own sub-faction in an F-Note state type setting of seeing triple changers as the next evolution of Transformers, along with extreme experimentation on many Cybertronian life forms as seen in the Align continuity, where he would experiment on wildlife to resurrect Predacons and evolve the Insecticons to become murderous machines. This would later continue into the IDW comics in his dangerous, calculated, and ruthless plans, such as the creation of altering and dangerously powering ores numbered 1 through 14, or known as the Regenesis program. He would experiment on Transformers, murder, and with no sense of emotions being due to his previous events, he'd become a machine that was unstoppable. With enough prep time, his vast knowledge, planning, his lack of morality, and many other traits creates one of the most evil, nefarious Decepticons loved by many for his various portrayals throughout the comics, and thus, in my opinion, the most evil Transformer in the Decepticon cause. Overall, these are who I think are the most dastardly Decepticons found in the Transformers multiverse, but I want to know what you guys think is the most evil. Comment down below who you think is the most evil Decepticon in the Transformers franchise. I'd love to know who you think should have been on this list. I want to thank you all for watching. Subscribe and turn on notifications for the next set of uploads about Transformers lore, characters, and the toys that grew us into fans. I am Grimoire Prime, and I will be seeing you next video.